Welcome, deep divers. Great to have you with us today. We're about to take a really fascinating plunge into history. But just before we do, a quick reminder about what's happening over on dghradio.com. You can catch weather updates at the bottom of each hour daily. That's 30 minutes past the hour every hour. Then FSN News follows just 15 minutes later, right on the 45-minute mark. Easy to remember. And for other news, well, we've got you covered 4 times a day, basically every 6 hours. If you're listening in the USVI, the U.S. Virgin Islands, your news is at 6 a.m. noon, 6 p.m. and midnight. For our listeners over in the BVI, the British Virgin Islands, that's 7 a.m., 1 p.m., 7 p.m., and 1 a.m. News from the wider Caribbean region airs at 8 a.m., 2 p.m., 8 p.m., and 2 a.m. And for the big picture U.S. and world news, tune in at 9 a.m., 3 p.m., 9 p.m., and 3 a.m. We also have our historical feature stories at 10 a.m., 4 p.m., 10 p.m., and 4 a.m. Really interesting stuff there. And Democracy Now!, that's on at 11 a.m., 5 p.m., 11 p.m., and 5 a.m. Though on weekends, we switch it up with other insightful topics.
Oh, and don't forget, all through the day, between those news reports, we play some fantastic, originally produced Caribbean cultural and Afro-influenced music. Really sets the vibe. Okay, got all that. Good. Now let's get into it. You're listening to The Deep Dive. This is where we take complex stories, break them down, and pull out the insights you need to be truly well-informed. And today we're uncovering a really remarkable historical event. One that gives July 4th a profound kind of dual meaning. This Today in History segment is brought to you by our friends at the DH News and Information Network.
Yeah, and it's more than just, a date on a calendar. It's quite a dramatic story, actually. It's about how one single, really courageous moment, sparked by people acting together, how that light of freedom slowly spread across an island. It changed everything, and it stamped this particular day, July 4th, with this truly unique mark of liberty.
That's interesting because usually when we hear July 4th, instantly you think fireworks, right? Barbecues, patriotism, celebrating American independence back in 1776. It's baked into how we think about the day. But you're saying for St. John, it's different. There's another layer.
Exactly. A really crucial layer. If you shift your focus just a bit south to the U.S. Virgin Islands, and specifically to the island of St. John, that same date, July 4th, it resonates with something deeper, something more complex. Yes, the American flag flies there now, absolutely. But historically, July 4th marks the day the news finally arrived. The news of their freedom. A freedom that had actually been declared the day before, on July 3rd. But for the people enslaved on St. John, July 4th was the day they heard they were free. It's independence, sure, but it's also tied directly to their emancipation story.
Okay, wait. So freedom's declared on one day, but the news doesn't get there until the next. How does that even happen, especially with news that massive? Let's unpack this a bit.
Well, you have to remember the time. We're talking 1848. No internet, no phones, not even telegraphs connecting the islands reliably. So the story really kicks off on July 3rd, 1848, but on the neighboring island, St. Croix. That day was monumental. Thousands of enslaved Africans, absolutely determined, marched on Fort Frederick in Frederickstead. They were led by a really charismatic figure, General Budo himself, formerly enslaved. His leadership was key. Imagine the power of that. Thousands moving together, demanding their freedom. Now, unconditionally. Their sheer numbers, their spirit. It was an undeniable force facing the Danish colonial authorities.
Wow, thousands marching. That must have been an incredible sight.
So how did the Governor General Peter von Scholten react to that?
Well, faced with this massive unified demand, what could he do? He made an absolutely historic declaration right then and there. He declared that all enslaved people in the Danish West Indies were, from that very moment, free. It was huge. And what's fascinating here is it wasn't really a benevolent gift. It was compelled by the collective action, the bravery of those people demanding their rights. It really highlights the power of people coming together. But like you said, 1848, communication wasn't instant.
Not even close.
Yeah.
News traveled at the speed of a sailing ship, basically.
Yeah.
A sloop between the islands. So picture this contrast. On St. Croix, July 3rd, there's jubilation. People are taking their first breaths as legally free individuals. Imagine that feeling. But just a few miles away, across the water on St. John, people are still working, still enslaved, completely unaware that the law, the highest authority in the land, had already declared their bondage over.
That's staggering, to be legally free but not know it.
Exactly. And it raises this really important point, doesn't it? What does freedom mean if it's declared but not yet known, not yet felt or experienced by the people it's supposed to liberate? It existed on paper in St. Croix, maybe in St. Thomas too, but on St. John, it was still just bondage, a day of unknowing bondage.
So how did the word finally get across? This is where it gets really interesting, the journey of that news.
Right. So fast forward one day. It's the afternoon of July 4th, 1848. A boat is seen cutting through those beautiful turquoise waters of Pillsbury Sound, heading for St. John. On board is a man named Captain Ingald Morier. He managed the Lameshire plantation down on St. John's South Shore. He'd been over in St. Thomas, the administrative center, and that's where he heard about von Scholten's proclamation. He knew he had to get back.
Okay, so Morier arrives in Croix Bay, St. John's main harbor, late that afternoon. He must have felt this incredible weight, this urgency. What did he do first?
He knew time was critical. He immediately went looking for the island's police master, a man named Carl Hanschel. You pick a picture of Croix Bay back then, pretty quiet, sleepy little port. And suddenly Morier arrives, carrying this truth bomb, basically. News that would change everything, instantly.
A new era dawning, carried by one man on a boat, looking for the local authority. So Morier finds Hanschel. These two men, suddenly they're the harbingers of this massive shift.
That's a good way to put it. Harbingers of a new, uncertain future. They understood the gravity, they got on horseback, the sun was starting to set, casting those long shadows across St. John's hills. And they started writing, spreading the word. Imagine to write the urgency, maybe even some fear about how the news would be received. Plantation by plantation.
Where did they go first? Did they just start announcing it in Croix Bay?
No, they headed inland, into the countryside as dusk was falling. Their first major stop was a plantation called Estate Adrian. And it's at Estate Adrian, under that twilight sky, that history records the enslaved people there became the very first on St. John to hear those unbelievable words they must have dreamed of, prayed for. You are free.
Wow. Estate Adrian, the first place on St. John to hear it. Do we know how many people that affected right there?
We do, actually. The last census before emancipation, taken in 1846, just 2 years earlier, it listed 105 enslaved individuals living and working at Estate Adrian. So for those 105 souls, or however many survived those 2 years, this wasn't just news, it was everything. The end of generations of forced labor, brutality, the beginning of something totally unknown, but definitely hopeful.
I can only imagine the reaction. Was it just stunned silence or?
Oh, the historical accounts, the journals from the time, they talk about overwhelming jubilation, just pure raw emotion. You can almost feel it echoing, can't you? This wave of joy, relief, maybe disbelief, spreading out from Estate Adrian. And Morier and Hanschel, they didn't stop there. They kept riding through the growing darkness, plantation after plantation, carrying this proclamation, this light of freedom deeper into the St. John night. It was literally the dawn of freedom arriving with the dusk.
So this dawn of freedom, as you call it, it arrived. But what did that actually mean on the ground the next day and the day after? Was it a smooth transition?
That's the crucial next part of the story. Because no, it wasn't smooth. Not at all. While the arrival of the news itself was this incredibly powerful, liberating moment, the reality of freedom was complex. It wasn't like flipping a switch.
Right. Because the systems were all built around slavery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, the Emancipation Proclamation itself, well, it meant very different things to different people.
Mm-hmm.
For the newly freed people, it meant liberty, yes, the right to their own lives, their own labor, their families, fundamental human rights. But for the former slave owners, the planters, it meant their entire economic system, their way of life built on owning other people, just collapsed overnight. That created enormous tension, resentment. The shift from chattel slavery to free labor was incredibly difficult and, frankly, deeply unequal for a very long time. Freedom on paper, July 3rd or 4th, was just the very first, very difficult step. The struggle for real equality, economic justice, that continued for decades, generations, really.
And that struggle, that history, it hasn't just disappeared into the past, has it? You mentioned it connects to the present day on St. John.
Absolutely. It lives on very vibrantly, actually, in the St. John celebration. If you're ever lucky enough to be on St. John around the 4th of July, you'll see it. It's huge. It's central to the island's identity. The culmination of the whole festival is always on the 4th of July.
So the celebration isn't just mirroring the U.S. holiday.
It incorporates it, yes, but it's so much more. It's fundamentally a festival of freedom. It commemorates Emancipation Day, July 3rd, when the Declaration was made. That's the official holiday. But it also holds this special recognition for July 4th, the day the news arrived on St. John, the day freedom became real there. It's this unique St. Johnian blend of history, heritage, resistance, and celebration. You won't find that exact mix anywhere else. It's their story.
So when the fireworks go off over Croix Bay Harbor on July 4th,
they're celebrating American independence, for sure. But for St. Johnians, those lights bursting in the sky, they also symbolize something incredibly personal, deeply felt, that delayed dawn of liberty. The moment their ancestors finally heard the words, "You are free." It's incredibly powerful when you understand that dual meaning.
That really changes how you might think about that day, especially on St. John. It makes you consider, doesn't it, how history and memory get woven together in our celebrations, and how something as simple as the timing of news, who knew what, when, could profoundly shape the experience of something as fundamental as freedom. What do you think St. John's unique July 4th teaches us about remembering history, and maybe about ongoing struggles too? Something to ponder. Well, thank you for joining us for this really illuminating deep dive into a lesser-known corner of history. This has been The Deep Dive, aiming to bring you these essential nuggets of knowledge. And remember, this Today in History segment was brought to you by the DAGH News and Information Network. Just before we go, one final reminder about staying informed with DAGHradio.com. Weather updates are at the bottom of every hour. FSN News hits 15 minutes later at 45 past the hour. Your regional news updates are 4 times daily. USVI at 6, 12, 6, and 12. BVI at 7, 1, 7, and 1. The wider Caribbean at 8, 2, 8, and 2. And U.S. and World News at 9, 3, 9, and 3. Don't miss our historical feature stories at 10, 4, 10, and 4. And Democracy Now! At 11, 5, 11, and 5, with different features on weekends. And always, that great Caribbean and Afro-influenced music between reports. Want news, weather, and more right on your phone? Join our WhatsApp group. Just text Join D8 WhatsApp group. Make sure to include your name in the message to 1-315-898-1449. That's 1-315-898-1449. We'll give you a quick call just to verify it's you.
Thanks again for tuning in, and thank you for supporting the DJ News and Information Network. We'll catch you next time.